I'm Dr. Michael McKain. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Alabama in the Department of Biological Sciences, and my role at CONSERVE is Assistant Director of Watershed Biodiversity. So I have known Dr. Chu for quite some time. We actually came in together here at UA and we collaborate on multiple projects because I'm a plant biologist and she studies in how people and plants have interacted with for hundreds and hundreds of years beyond. So we were talking about just some opportunities and wanting to work together, and then this kind of started to form. So I was kind of on the ground floor with developing CONSERVE as a whole, and then I got to meet Mike Federoff, and I knew Jared as well. So we kind of all knew each other a little bit and had a lot of overlapping interests, and just realized that we could do a lot more good together than apart. So I've been thinking about this a lot as I, transitioning to associate professor and getting tenure, and thinking about like, what's the next 5 years look like? What's the next 10 years look like? What's my legacy as a faculty member or even just a person in the world? And CONSERVE is falling into that quite a bit, I think, just because to me CONSERVE means an opportunity to integrate the needs of people with the needs of the environment, and then to listen to both sides, and then to bring that together to form solutions to problems that we either have now or we will have in the immediate future. In all honesty, I think a lot about I have a kid, and I think about what the future they're gonna have and what the world's gonna look like for them, and how, whether that's struggling with resources or struggling with environmental impact or whatever. And I'm hoping that I can, with CONSERVE, grow something that's going to make the world better for them, and then in turn better for everyone. So I'm a plant biologist, a plant systematist, really, which means I'm interested in how plants are related to each other and where the diversity of plants comes from. So, biodiversity is kind of like my whole shtick. But I'm also an evolutionary genomics person, so I'm interested in understanding how genomes function and how those genomes relate to the diversity that we see. So a lot of what my basic research in my lab is all associated with understanding how genome functions change over time, and how we get changes in pollinator interactions, or how we get crops that are adapted to flooding tolerance or not adapted to flooding tolerance, or whatever your favorite phenotype is. So to me, that work fits perfectly with our goal in the biodiversity or watershed biodiversity directorate, because we're interested in maintaining and cultivating biodiversity as it is, but also protecting ecosystems and promoting the retention of biodiversity through time, but also allowing people to work with that biodiversity. We know that there's nothing separate between humans and the environment. We're always interacting with it, and we're always going to need to interact with it, and we can benefit from each other more than if we approach interactions in the right way. So I think my research helps to build a foundation of our understanding of that biodiversity, and then understanding how it functions then allows us to understand better how we can interact with it in various ways. We don't do anything by ourselves, right? Like whether it's just going out to the store. You think about all the things that you use in getting your car and driving somewhere else. People put that car together, you buy gas, someone drilled the gas. There's so many aspects of our lives that's interconnected, and we're not always thinking about that. And I think that with community and as a whole, we can't function in this world without each other. And that each other expands away from not just other people, but also the organisms and the environment itself. We're all interconnected, and we're always interacting with each other in different ways. You make decisions every day on something that you choose to do, and it has a long-standing impact and a ripple effect. That could be a small one, or it could be a large one. You never know what the decision you make today could end up being in the long term. So I think that for community to be such a central part of CONSERVE, it just allows us to remember that. To remember that other individuals in a system, and whether it's humans or other organisms, matter, and that their needs and desires and wants all accumulate together to form some final product. And that product is usually like ecosystems and how they are working. and that we can't divorce from each other, really. We're always going to be connected. So we should figure out how to act as a positive community as opposed to an antagonistic community. And I think that people are really good at doing this in the long term. I think we sometimes forget that and we kind of lose sight of that, but ultimately by using other communities, so indigenous knowledge, like traditional ecological knowledge, for example, we can look at peoples who have listened and observed and understood how to interact with those communities in positive ways and respect both the needs and wants of the community of these, an organism, a plant, or whatever is there, and the needs and wants of the people interacting with it. And then that's part of what Conserve's goal is to further those needs and wants for both sides. It's funny being in Alabama with water, right? I mean, it's great because Alabama has so much water, but there are lots of other peoples in the United States and beyond where water's a challenge today, and it's going to be more of a challenge in the future. And I think that by understanding more how ecosystems and humans interact with water in various ways and how water usage differs across the needs of whether it's a cultural or community need that's varied, or it's like an ecosystem need, right? So the amount of water that it requires for a desert community, for example, versus like a Alabama forest community, way different. But then if you tack on the needs of some agriculture, right? People need to eat, and that's important, and food takes a lot of water to grow, and so then we have to siphon off of that. So I think that by again, keeping the community in mind, both the human community and the larger community, that what we're able to do is remember that both sides have stake in the game and that both sides matter and both sides are necessary for each other. We want to build these positive relationships between human communities and organismal communities as we function as one ecosystem. And whether that's an agricultural-based one, an urban-based one, or even just like out in the wild, it's like a forest or something like that. I think that Conserve's role will be to, one, have a positive integrative interaction between these needs and understanding what people want and what the environment is doing and needs and wants, right? And then also having an understanding or a desire to see both sides succeed. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not this idea of one side has to win and the other side has to lose, but we can both win and work together. And that's going to require some different types of thinking. And I think Conserve is going to help push that different type of thinking. I think that by being integrative and listening to lots of different sides and lots of different opinions and lots of different needs and wants, that we'll be able to hopefully come together with really diverse conclusions that will be able to be implemented in lots of really beneficial ways. I don't know that there's a such thing as a non-water person, right? I mean, we all need water. We're all using it constantly. I mean, drink your 64 ounces or whatever a day. But also, we are always, whether we're eating food that requires lots of water usage, whether we're having water piped into our houses, or we're wearing clothes that took water to produce, or anything. We're always interacting with water. It's a vital part of everything. So we're maybe not from a professional standpoint and maybe not a research standpoint, a person isn't studying specifically water and they never thought, well, how does water play a role in this? But if they step back for 1 second, water's definitely there. And I think even for, like with my research, for example, I'm always thinking about the way genomes work. And I'm thinking what's going on inside of cells and how does that equate to a larger thing. I'm not thinking about some abstract way of how's water flowing in a river, but it doesn't mean that water's not there, because everything, especially associated with biology, for example, and biology encompasses any interaction among life in this planet, whether it's people producing something or it's organisms growing in the forest, life is interconnected. And because it's interconnected, all these things matter to everyone and everyone has a role to play in it. So I think when a person is like, maybe I'm not a water person, I think that they haven't realized they are yet. And that's totally okay. We are not alone, right? I think that's very obvious. We had the pandemic and we were all alone kind of in that, right? But in reality, we were finding new ways to connect. That was like one of the things that people talked about the most. We need to connect. And then Zoom became huge and online interactions became huge or bigger than they already were. And I think that demonstrates basic human community needs. Like functioning alone is just not within the wheelhouse of humanity. But because of the interconnectivity of all life and how I cannot exist in the world without impacting other things, I'm always in a community. If I go out into the woods by myself, I'm in a community. I'm in the community of that forest. I'm in the community of whatever system that I'm a part of. So I think that we're always interacting in a community, but then it becomes, well, how do we bring that to the forefront? How do we keep that in mind? Well, I kind of mentioned this a little bit previously, but it's all about every actor in these interactions has needs and has goals, whether I'm anthropomorphizing like a rock or a river, or it's a person who wants to feed their family. Everybody is there and everybody has something that they need and want. And I think that by remembering that from the get-go and knowing that the way that we interact with each other and the way we interact with the world needs to be considered as part of the research that we do or the plans that we make or the solutions that we come up with the problems is really important for us to move forward and to have a better impact on the world in general. I think also that by using diverse community structure and thinking of working with sociologists, working with anthropologists, working with psychologists, working with meteorologists, working with everybody who has some different perspective on the way that we can do this, or working with a farmer, working with a person who works at the Mercedes plant here in Tuscaloosa. Everyone has a role to play. Everyone has something they need, something they want, something that will impact them in this whole game of watershed biodiversity and/or watershed nexus or just water security. So I think keeping in mind that everyone's got a thought and an opinion and everyone has a goal that they're striving for is really important. And by bringing in diverse opinions, whether it's the researchers on the team or whether it's our stakeholders, like these people that we go out and just talk to and be like, what do you need and what do you want? And then combining that with what we understand about what's the environment need, what's the impact of the organisms, whether it's plants, animals, fungi, whatever that are in these environments, how are they responding to our needs? How do we respond to their needs? I think that by always pulling these together and having these really large networks of understanding, it's going to help us make a solution that's the best solution that we can at the time. The struggle, I think, will always be implementing that solution, but I think by just bringing the solution to the table, then we'll be able to build a larger community even on top of that to bring the right people in to start thinking about how do we make that even more likely a future. So I think of these aspects of what CONSERVE's really pushing towards. A few of them interact so closely in my mind that it's hard for me to separate them. So the idea of ecosystem services is a huge one. Ecosystem services are when an ecosystem, so the interaction between organisms and their environment, provides something that is beneficial to people or beneficial to the environment themselves, right? So a major aspect of this when it comes to water is cleaning the water. Water gets filtered through a big marsh or something like that, and the plants suck up nitrates and they suck up all these things. So their plants are happy, they're growing, and the water becomes less polluted, for example, with maybe agricultural runoff pollution is a prime example. So that service would be something that would be ridiculously expensive if we had to do it ourselves. Filtering water is expensive, right? It's much better to have it done naturally or for free, which then impacts these underserved communities. They don't have the money to do that themselves, but they rely on the water. They need clean, fresh water for just existing and living. But if the ecosystems are destroyed or the ecosystems are damaged in a way that the ecosystem services go away, then the community gets immediately impacted by that. One of the ways to promote ecosystem health and keeping ecosystem services going is to promote biodiversity. We know that by the more interactions of diverse organisms we have in an area, the more overall the ecosystem is healthy because it has resilience. It's able, if something happens, like a disease comes through and it hurts like one species, but if there's another species that can kind of do the same job that that one did, it can take over while the other species maybe recovers or another species moves in to do the job. So by having all this diversity, biodiversity specifically, we're able to keep the ecosystems functioning in a positive way. And by doing that, they keep their ecosystem services running, which then helps not only underserved communities, but like humans in general, or even the environment in general. So these small things like protecting a marsh, for example, and by maintaining the species diversity in it, can have huge impacts down the line. And whether your interest is environmental health and just being excited about the biodiversity of the planet, or your interest is money in your pocket, right? Both those things matter, and both of those things can come to the table. For CONSERVE, what I'm really hoping for is to build a institution that is withstanding, that it's going to be here and it's going to be bigger than the sum of the people that are a part of it, that's going to be impactful, and it's going to help shape the way we interact with the world. And by we, I mean people. And it's a very lofty goal, but you know, and I kind of mentioned at the beginning when I'm thinking about like the future and like what I want my career to look like in the next 5+ years, you know, I want to make a difference, and I want to be a part of a community that makes a difference, and I see CONSERVE as being that community. I am CONSERVE.